Anil Ambani. The story of Anil Ambani is perhaps one of the most dramatic unravelings of wealth in corporate history, marking a steep decline from being the sixth richest person in the world to pleading poverty in a London court. Anil inherited a massive portion of the Reliance empire after the death of his legendary father, Dhirubhai Ambani, in 2002, and following a bitter feud with his elder brother Mukesh, the family business was split in 2005, with Anil taking control of telecom, power, and infrastructure interests. At his peak in 2008, he was celebrated as a global titan with a net worth estimated at over $42 billion, living a lifestyle defined by private jets, Bollywood connections, and massive infrastructure projects that promised to reshape India. However, his fortunes began to turn due to a combination of over-leveraged expansion and fierce competition, particularly in the telecommunications sector, where his brother Mukesh eventually launched Jio, a data-focused carrier that engaged in a brutal price war, which Anil's Reliance Communications simply could not survive. Burdened by billions of dollars in debt, his companies began to falter one by one, with Reliance Communications filing for bankruptcy, and his power and naval defense businesses struggling under the weight of unpaid loans and regulatory issues. The situation reached a humiliating nadir in 2020 during a dispute with three Chinese banks seeking the recovery of nearly $700 million in defaulted loans, leading Anil Ambani to tell a judge in the UK that his net worth was zero and that he was essentially living off the sale of his wife's jewelry, a staggering admission for a man who once held the keys to one of India's largest conglomerates. Ike Batista. Ike Batista was once the living embodiment of Brazil's economic boom, a charismatic commodities magnate who famously declared he would soon surpass Bill Gates to become the richest man on earth, but instead found himself serving a 30-year prison sentence. In 2012, Batista was the seventh richest person in the world, with a fortune estimated at around $30 billion, built on the back of his EBX Group, a sprawling empire of mining, energy, and logistics companies distinguished by three-letter names ending in the letter X to symbolize the multiplication of wealth. His crown jewel was OGX, an oil and gas company that raised billions from investors based on promises of massive offshore oil discoveries that Batista claimed would turn Brazil into an energy superpower. However, the geology did not cooperate with his ambitions, and as production targets were repeatedly missed, it became clear that the touted oil fields were largely duds, leading to a cataclysmic collapse in investor confidence that triggered a massive sell-off of his company's stocks. As the empire crumbled under a mountain of debt, investigations revealed that Batista had engaged in insider trading and market manipulation in a desperate attempt to prop up the illusion of success. His fall was absolute, transitioning from dining with presidents and displaying a Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren in his living room to being arrested by federal police as part of Brazil's sweeping Operation Car Wash corruption probe. By the time his assets were seized and he was sentenced for corruption and money laundering, his net worth had not only hit zero, but had plummeted into the negative by over $1 billion, marking the first time a self-made billionaire had lost such a vast fortune so quickly. Sam Bankman-Fried. The collapse of Sam Bankman-Fried is a modern tragedy of hubris and fraud that evaporated a $26 billion fortune in a matter of days and shook the foundations of the global cryptocurrency market. Known by his initials SBF, he cultivated an image as an eccentric, altruistic genius who slept on beanbags and played video games during pitch meetings, all while running FTX, which was at one point the second largest crypto exchange in the world. He courted politicians, celebrities, and major venture capital firms, presenting FTX as the safe, regulated face of crypto, while championing a philosophy of effective altruism where he claimed his goal was to earn as much money as possible solely to give it away to charity. Beneath this benevolent facade, however, lay a complex web of deceit involving his hedge fund Alameda Research, which was secretly using billions of dollars of FTX customer funds to cover its own risky trading losses and illiquid investments. The scheme unraveled with breathtaking speed in November 2022 after a report leaked showing Alameda's financial instability trigger a bank run where terrified customers tried to withdraw billions from FTX only to find their money was gone. Bankman-Fried went from being the cover star of Forbes and a major political donor to a criminal defendant in a federal courtroom where his former inner circle testified against him, revealing that the boy genius had orchestrated one of the largest financial frauds in American history. He was found guilty on all counts. His billions vanished into legal fees and bankruptcy proceedings, leaving him facing decades in prison and cementing his legacy as the face of crypto's darkest hour. Sean Quinn. Sean Quinn's journey from a humble quarry owner to the richest man in Ireland and back to bankruptcy is a cautionary tale about the dangers of gambling on the stock market with leverage. Starting his career digging gravel on his family farm, Quinn built a manufacturing and insurance powerhouse, the Quinn Group, which dominated industries ranging from cement to radiators and health insurance, eventually earning him a personal net worth of roughly $6 billion or 4.7 billion euros at his peak in 2008. He was a national icon of success in Ireland, employing thousands of people in the border region of Cavan and Fermanagh, but his downfall was triggered by a secret and obsessive investment in the Anglo-Irish Bank. Quinn used a complex financial instrument known as contracts for difference, or CFDs, to build up a massive hidden stake in the bank, effectively betting the entire future of his diverse business empire on the share price of a single financial institution. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the Irish banking sector collapsed, and the share price of Anglo-Irish Bank plummeted to near zero, turning Quinn's leveraged bets into a financial black hole that sucked in billions of euros from his profitable insurance businesses to cover the margin calls. The Irish government eventually nationalized the bank and seized control of the Quinn Group to recoup the losses, leading to a bitter legal war that saw Quinn declare bankruptcy, serve a 9-week jail sentence for contempt of court, and lose the empire that took him a lifetime to build.
Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes was once heralded as the next Steve Jobs, a visionary dropout from Stanford University who became the world's youngest female self-made billionaire on paper with a net worth of $4.5 billion before her medical technology company was exposed as a massive fraud. She founded Theranos in 2003 with a revolutionary promise that her company had developed a device, dubbed the Edison, that could run hundreds of complex medical tests using just a single drop of blood from a finger prick, a technology that would have disrupted the entire diagnostic industry. Captivating the world with her intense gaze and signature black turtlenecks, she raised nearly $1 billion from high-profile investors, including Rupert Murdoch and the Walton family, and assembled a board of directors that included former U.S. Secretaries of State Henry Kissinger and George Shultz. However, the technology simply did not work, and the company was secretly running the majority of its tests on standard commercial analyzers purchased from other companies like Siemens, while returning often inaccurate and dangerous medical results to real patients. The deception was unmasked by investigative journalist John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal, whose reporting triggered regulatory investigations that forced Theranos to void 2 years of blood tests and eventually dissolve. Holmes was charged with massive fraud, stripping her of her wealth and reputation, and she was subsequently convicted and sentenced to over 11 years in prison, marking a stark end to a career built on a lie that endangered public health. Jocelyn Wildenstein. Jocelyn Wildenstein, frequently referred to by the tabloids as the Catwoman due to her extensive plastic surgeries, presents a unique case of a billionaire losing everything, not through business failure, but through unchecked lifestyle inflation and an inability to manage liquid cash. She came into immense wealth in 1999 following a high-profile divorce from art dealer Alec Wildenstein, receiving a settlement of $2.5 billion, plus an annual allowance of $100 million for 13 years, which was at the time the largest divorce settlement in history. The judge in the case famously included a stipulation that she could not use the alimony money for further cosmetic surgeries, a nod to her obsession with altering her appearance to look more feline. Despite this astronomical windfall, Wildenstein's spending habits were legendary and unsustainable, with reports of her spending $60,000 a year on phone bills alone and over $500,000 a year on food and wine. Over 2 decades, this burn rate, combined with a lack of new income streams and several lawsuits, drained her resources until she shocked the world by filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2018. In her filing, she claimed to have $0 in her checking account and was surviving on Social Security payments of $900 a month, a surreal come-down for a woman who once inhabited a world of unimaginable luxury and excess.
Alan Stanford. Alan Stanford orchestrated one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, second only to Bernie Madoff, fraudulently amassing a fortune that allowed him to live like a king while wiping out the life savings of thousands of investors. As the chairman of the Stanford Financial Group, based in the Caribbean nation of Antigua and Barbuda, he marketed certificates of deposits, CDs, that promised consistently high returns that defied market trends, claiming the money was invested in safe, liquid assets. In reality, Stanford was using new investor money to pay off earlier investors and to fund a lavish personal empire that included private jets, yachts, and the bankrolling of international cricket tournaments, where he was once seen landing a helicopter on the cricket pitch carrying a case filled with $20 million in cash. His influence in Antigua was so total that he was knighted by the government and became the island's largest employer, creating a protective bubble around his operations until the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission began investigating his returns in 2009. The investigation revealed an $8 billion fraud, and when agents raided his offices, the facade collapsed instantly, leaving investors with pennies on the dollar and Stanford with nothing. He was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and conspiracy and sentenced to 110 years in federal prison, stripping him of his knighthood, his wealth, and his freedom, while his victims were left to fight for years to recover a fraction of their lost savings. Vijay Mallya. Vijay Mallya, once known as the King of Good Times, was a flamboyant Indian tycoon who inherited a liquor empire and expanded it into a diverse conglomerate, only to lose it all through the disastrous mismanagement of an airline. Mallya took over United Breweries Group from his father and grew it into one of the world's largest spirits makers, becoming a billionaire famous for his mullet, diamond ear studs, and ownership of a Formula One racing team and a cricket franchise. His downfall began with the 2005 launch of Kingfisher Airlines, a luxury carrier that aimed to provide a 5-star hotel experience in the sky, complete with personal entertainment systems and gourmet food, but which burned through cash at an alarming rate in a highly price-sensitive market. To keep the airline afloat, Mallya borrowed heavily from a consortium of Indian banks, pledging his personal assets and shares in his profitable liquor companies as collateral. But the airline never turned a profit and eventually collapsed in 2012, leaving unpaid employees and billions in debt. As banks moved to recover the loans, Mallya fled to the United Kingdom in 2016 to avoid arrest, leading the Indian government to label him a fugitive economic offender and initiate extradition proceedings. His assets in India, including his real estate and shares, were seized and sold by the authorities, and he was declared bankrupt by a British court in 2021, completing the transition from a billionaire playboy to a bankrupt exile fighting to stay out of an Indian jail.
Björgólfur Guðmundsson. Björgólfur Guðmundsson's financial demise is inextricably linked to the total economic collapse of Iceland in 2008, a national crisis that wiped out his billion-dollar fortune and destroyed his reputation as one of his country's most prominent businessmen. Guðmundsson, a former shipping executive who had rebuilt his career after an earlier legal scandal in the 1990s, rose to incredible heights alongside his son Thor by investing in the brewing industry and subsequently moving into banking, becoming the chairman and largest shareholder of Landsbanki, one of Iceland's 3 major banks. At his peak, he was the second richest man in Iceland, with a net worth of over $1.1 billion, and owned the English Premier League football club West Ham United, symbolizing the reach of Icelandic capital during the credit boom. However, when the 2008 financial crisis struck, Iceland's over-leveraged banking system imploded and Landsbanki was nationalized by the government, rendering his shares worthless overnight. Unlike many other billionaires who shield their personal assets, Guðmundsson had personally guaranteed hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, meaning the bank's failure dragged him directly into insolvency. In 2009, he was declared bankrupt with debts amounting to nearly $800 million, resulting in the loss of West Ham United and his complete removal from the global billionaire rankings, leaving him with a legacy defined by the hubris of the Icelandic banking bubble. Nathan Tinkler. Nathan Tinkler's story is a meteoric rise and fall that saw him go from a pit electrician to Australia's youngest billionaire and back to bankruptcy in the span of just a few years. Tinkler made his initial fortune by gambling on coal assets that others had overlooked, famously buying a coal deposit for a relatively small sum and flipping it for hundreds of millions of dollars as commodity prices soared, and then repeating the process with another massive deal that netted him over $1 billion in cash and shares. Flushed with cash in his mid-30s, he embarked on a spectacular spending spree, purchasing a private jet, a stable of thoroughbred racehorses, and 2 professional sports teams, the Newcastle Knights rugby league team and the Newcastle Jets soccer club, while living a life of aggressive luxury. However, his empire was built on the assumption that coal prices would remain high forever, and when the commodities market crashed in 2012, Tinkler found himself overextended with massive debts and dwindling revenue streams. His frantic attempts to sell assets to cover his liabilities failed as creditors closed in, leading to the liquidation of his companies, the seizure of his beloved sports teams and horses, and eventually a declaration of bankruptcy. Tinkler was left with a travel ban and the humiliation of having burned through $1 billion fortune faster than almost anyone in Australian history, serving as a stark reminder of the volatility of resource wealth. Thanks for taking the time to watch. If you found this interesting, leave a comment with your own take on the topic. Be sure to subscribe if you want to catch more videos like this in the future. Thanks again, and see you next time.